"Get out of my house now! You'll live on the streets!" shouted the wealthy stepmother at the triplets. Years later, she almost fainted when she opened the door and found the triplets arriving in huge moving trucks. 3 identical pink ribbons fluttered in the late summer air as the girls raced through the manicured grounds of Blackwood Manor. Abigail led the game of tag, her blonde hair catching the afternoon sun with each energetic stride. Eleanor, ever the most cautious, navigated a safer route among the trimmed boxwood hedges, while Grace, the boldest of the 3, vaulted over flower beds without a second thought. "Girls," William's deep, affectionate voice cut through their game from the porch. "Come here, princesses." They stopped on a dime, turning in unison to see their father, tall, broad-shouldered, and with a gentle smile that always reached his eyes. William Lancaster carried a leather briefcase in one hand and 3 small, colorfully wrapped packages in the other. The girls sprinted toward him, their identical light blue dresses billowing in the Chicago breeze. "Dad's going to travel for a few days," he said, kneeling to meet their gaze. "But I brought each of you a special gift." Abigail received a storybook with a gleaming golden cover, her eyes shining at the intricate illustrations. Eleanor clutched a small teddy bear dressed in a pink tutu to her chest, immediately cradling it like a precious jewel. Grace held a box of crayons with every color imaginable, a treasure for a budding artist. Elizabeth watched the scene from the doorway, the sharp clack of her high heels echoing rhythmically against the marble floor as she approached. Her tight black dress and pearl necklace seemed at odds with her tense expression. "William, your taxi has arrived." "I'm coming, dear." William hugged each daughter for a long moment, his woody cologne imprinting itself on the girls' memories. "Behave for Liz, all right? Dad will be back soon." The girls waved from the grand porch as the taxi disappeared down the long gravel path. Elizabeth's smile vanished the instant the car turned the corner. Inside. Now. Her voice sliced through the air like a razor. In the triplets' bedroom, neatly organized toys shared space with 3 identical beds, each adorned with a favorite print: butterflies for Abigail, flowers for Eleanor, and stars for Grace. The girls sat on their beds as quiet as frightened birds, while Elizabeth paced back and forth. The sound of something shattering downstairs made them jump. Elizabeth stormed up the steps like a hurricane, her eyes flashing with a cold fury. In her hand, she held the shards of what was once her favorite Meissen porcelain vase. "Which one of you did this?" Her voice trembled with rage. "Which one?" "It was the wind, Liz," Eleanor whispered, clutching her new teddy bear. The window was open. "Liars!" Elizabeth lunged, yanking the teddy bear from Eleanor's hands and hurling it against the wall. "All 3 of you, just like your mother. Homewreckers." Abigail tried to reach for her new book, but Elizabeth was faster. One by one, the gifts were snatched from the girls and tossed out the second-story window. "Get out of my house!" Elizabeth's scream reverberated through the walls. "Now, you'll live on the streets." Grace was the first to start crying, followed by Eleanor. Abigail, trying to be strong for her sisters, held their small, trembling hands. "But, Dad," Abigail began, "your father isn't here." Elizabeth grabbed Abigail by the arm and dragged her from the bedroom, the other 2 tripping over their own feet as they followed. "This is my house now." Step by step, the girls were shoved down the grand staircase. The sky, once blue and inviting, was now darkening with storm clouds. Elizabeth flung the front door open with violence, the cold autumn wind sweeping into the mansion. Out. Now. Abigail wrapped her arms around her sisters, forming a small protective circle as they descended the porch steps. Silent tears streamed down their identical faces. The wind blew harder now, tangling their blonde hair and making their blue dresses dance sadly. The door slammed shut behind them with a final booming crash. The 3 6-year-old girls stood in the garden that mere minutes before had been their playground. The pink ribbons in their hair, now undone, were the last reminder of a life that had just been shattered. The first drops of rain began to fall, mixing with the tears on their small, frightened faces. Distant thunder heralded the approaching storm, while 3 pairs of blue eyes looked for the last time at the manor they once called home. In the Blue Plate diner, the TV flashed blue and red images against the greasy walls. Abigail, Eleanor, and Grace squeezed together in a single booth seat, sharing a cup of hot chocolate, kindly given by a soft-hearted waitress. Their blue dresses, now stained and damp from the rain, still dripped onto the linoleum floor. "We interrupt our program for an urgent bulletin," announced the newscaster, her grave expression filling the screen. Airway Flight 2471 to Tokyo has lost contact with air traffic control approximately 2 hours ago. Rescue teams have already been mobilized. The hot chocolate slipped from Abigail's hands, spilling on the floor. It was their father's flight. "Dad," Eleanor whispered, clinging even more tightly to her sisters. The waitress, who had been keeping an eye on the girls, approached them with a phone in her hand. "Sweeties, I'm sorry, but I had to call social services. 3 little children alone in the middle of the night." The blue and red lights now shone from outside the diner. 2 social workers entered, their heels echoing on the wet floor. The older one, Mrs. Thompson, had tired eyes and carried a notepad. The younger one, Miss Peters, held 3 blankets. "There aren't enough spots in the same shelter," Mrs. Thompson whispered to her colleague, thinking she was out of the girls' earshot. "We'll have to separate them." "No!" Abigail hugged her sisters tight. "Please, we can't be separated." But the system had no room for sentimentality. In 3 different cars, the triplets were taken to 3 different destinations. Abigail watched through the window as Mrs. Thompson's car wound through progressively narrower streets until stopping in front of a gray building with bars on the windows. Hopewell Orphanage would be her new home. Room 23, bed by the window, the director, a tall woman with square glasses, informed her. "Breakfast is at 6:30 a.m. Don't be late." Room 23 housed 5 other girls, all older than Abigail. None looked her way as she curled up in the assigned bed, hugging the thin pillow as if it were Eleanor's teddy bear. Meanwhile, across the city, Eleanor arrived at a suburban house with a white picket fence and a swing in the yard. Mr. and Mrs. Miller waited at the door with anxious smiles. "Welcome to your new home, dear," said Mrs. Miller, extending her hand. Her smile was kind, but her eyes betrayed an old sorrow. "We lost our Sarah 2 years ago. She would be your age now." The room prepared for Eleanor was pink from floor to ceiling, pink wallpaper, pink curtains, even a pink teddy bear on the bed. Everything screamed Sarah, and nothing said Eleanor. Grace's fate was different. Miss Peters' car never reached its destination. At the first red light, the boldest of the 3 opened the door and ran. She ran as she had never run before, her small bare feet slapping against the wet asphalt. She found shelter under a store awning, watching people hurry by, protected by their umbrellas. An abandoned newspaper displayed the headline that changed everything. "Plane disappears over Pacific, 237 passengers on board." In the manor, Elizabeth watched the same news, a glass of red wine trembling in her hand. William's face appeared on the screen among pictures of the passengers. She turned up the volume. Among the passengers was businessman William Lancaster, who was traveling on business. The glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the marble floor. The red liquid spread like blood at her feet. "Dead," she mumbled to herself. "He's dead?" Her eyes drifted to a wedding photo on the wall, she, William, and the triplets, all smiling. For a moment, guilt flickered across her face, but she washed it away with another swig of wine, straight from the bottle. Better this way, she decided, ripping the photo off the wall. Now, everything is truly mine. Weeks turned into months. At Hopewell, Abigail quickly learned the orphanage's unwritten rules. By day, she kept her head down, studied hard, and helped in the kitchen. At night, under her blanket, she wrote letters to her sisters, letters she would never send because she had no address. At the Millers, Eleanor lived a life of appearances. By day, she was the perfect daughter they had always wanted, wearing dresses chosen by Mrs. Miller and answering to the name Sarah whenever Mr. Miller got confused. At night, she cried silently into her pink pillow, clutching a piece of the blue dress she wore the day they were separated. Grace learned the rules of the streets. By day, she roamed downtown Chicago, figuring out which diners threw away still edible food at closing time, which doormen were kind enough to let her sleep in doorways on rainy nights. By night, she sheltered in an old abandoned shipping container she shared with 2 other street kids, dreaming of the day she would find her sisters again. 3 months after the plane's disappearance, a small note in the newspaper stated, "Search for Flight 2471 officially ends. No survivors found." Elizabeth kept the clipping in her drawer alongside the documents that made her the sole owner of the manor and William's fortune. The 3 girls who once ran through the garden were now just ghosts in her memory, ghosts she drowned daily in ever more frequent glasses of wine. In 3 different parts of the city, 3 identical girls looked at the same crescent moon. Through her window, Abigail, from her bunk bed in the orphanage, promised herself she would one day be strong enough to find her sisters. Eleanor, in her pink room, vowed never to forget who she really was, no matter how many times they called her Sarah. And Grace, from the top of her shipping container, made plans on how to survive another day, always scanning the streets for faces identical to her own. None of them knew that in a distant hospital, a man with a battered face opened his eyes for the first time in months, with no memory of who he was or the 3 little princesses who called him Dad. The church tower clock struck 6 as Abigail, now 12, woke up at Hopewell Orphanage. Her blonde hair, still as long as in the manor days, was neatly braided, a trick she had learned to stay presentable with few resources. "Jenny? Wake up," she whispered gently, shaking the new girl who had arrived the night before. "Breakfast is in half an hour, and you don't want to be late." Over the last 6 years, Abigail had become an unofficial leader among the younger girls at the orphanage. She knew exactly how long each newcomer needed to adapt, which words to use for comfort, when to offer a hug, or just understanding silence. In the kitchen, Abigail led her team of helpers with surprising efficiency for someone her age. "Maria, you handle the milk today. Anna, you're on toast. Jenny, can you help me with the dishes?" Director Roberts watched from the door, a faint smile crossing her stern face. "Lancaster," she called, using the last name as she always did. "My office after breakfast." In the austere office, the director went straight to the point. "Abigail, you have the potential to do far more than serve breakfast. I'm nominating you for the school's Young Leaders Program. It's an opportunity few girls from the orphanage get." Abigail nodded, grateful, but her gaze wandered to the window. Outside, 2 younger girls played tag, painfully reminding her of her sisters. Across the city, Eleanor sat rigidly at the Millers' breakfast table. Her school uniform was impeccable, just as Mrs. Miller demanded, but her hands trembled slightly as she held her teacup. "Sarah, dear," Mrs. Miller said, ignoring the way Eleanor flinched at the wrong name. "Don't forget, we have a piano recital tonight." "But, Mom," Eleanor began, her voice almost a whisper. "I told you, today is the tryout for the art club." "Art?" Mr. Miller lowered his newspaper, frowning. "Sarah, we've discussed this. Our daughter was a gifted pianist." "I am not Sarah." Eleanor's words burst out before she could stop them, 6 years of frustration spilling over in a single sentence. The sound of Mrs. Miller's hand slamming on the table froze them all. "Go to your room. Now." In the pink room that still suffocated her, Eleanor pulled a shoebox from under her bed. Inside were her secret drawings, dozens of them, all showing 3 identical girls playing in a sunny garden. In each picture, the girls wore blue dresses and pink ribbons in their hair. Meanwhile, downtown, Grace moved like a shadow among the hurrying pedestrians. Her blonde hair, now cut short for practicality, was hidden under a worn beanie. She had developed a 6th sense to spot both opportunities and dangers. "Hey, Shorty," Miguel, one of the boys who shared the shipping container with her, waved from an alley. "I found something you're going to like." In a cardboard box, 3 tiny kittens mewed weakly. "Their mother never came back," Miguel explained. "Just like us." Grace picked the kittens up gently. "We'll look after them," she decided. Over the years, she had learned that surviving wasn't just about food and shelter, it was about holding on to humanity. Her small group of street dwellers had grown over the years. Grace was known for always sharing what she could get and never leaving anyone behind. She had a keen eye to identify who really needed help and who was trying to take advantage. "The new bakery on Augusta Street throws out fresh bread at 9, she informed her little group. "But we have to be discreet. No trouble, or we lose that spot." In a city miles away, a man known as Mike worked under a car at Honest Bob's garage. His hands moved with a natural precision, as though they remembered a life his mind could not recall. "Mike," called his boss. "A customer here says you were the only one who fixed his car last year." Something about a strange noise in the engine. Mike, who was once William, slid out from under the car, wiping his grease-stained hands on a rag. He smiled politely at the customer, but his eyes had that characteristic emptiness of someone searching for memories that just aren't there. At night, in the small apartment above the shop, he sat at a table with his journal. It was part of his routine, recommended by the doctors, writing down any memory fragment, however small, that surfaced. "I dreamed of children laughing today," he wrote. 3 identical laughs and pink ribbons fluttering in the wind. "But when I wake up, the faces are just shadows." Back at the orphanage, Abigail was planning a surprise party for one of the youngest girls. She had learned to make decorations out of recycled newspaper and convinced the cook to bake an extra cake with the week's leftovers. "You'd make a great mom, Abigail," commented one of the staff, watching her tell bedtime stories to the younger children. Abigail smiled, but her eyes held an old sadness. "I had good examples," she replied, thinking of how she used to care for her sisters. "And one day I'll find them again." At the Millers', Eleanor performed in the piano recital. Her fingers danced across the keys without error, but also without soul. In the front row, Mrs. Miller smiled proudly, whispering to the other mothers, "My Sarah has always had a natural gift." Later that night, alone in her room, Eleanor opened her secret diary. "Dear Abby and Grace," she wrote, as she did every evening. "Today I played Beethoven, but the whole time I imagined us 3 running around the manor's garden. Sometimes when I play, I close my eyes and pretend I'm home with you." In the shipping container, Grace sorted the day's supplies. Besides food, she always looked for potentially useful items. Old blankets, discarded clothes, even thrown-away books. "Why do you care so much about helping everyone?" Miguel asked one night as they shared a loaf of bread. Grace looked up at the stars through the container's gaps. "Because I know what it's like to be alone, and no one should go through that." In his apartment, William Mike woke up in a fright from another fragmented dream. This time it had been more vivid. 3 little girls running toward him, calling, "Daddy!" But as always, when he tried to focus on their faces, he found only frustrating emptiness. His fingers instinctively touched the scar on his temple, the reminder of the accident that stole his memory. The doctors said his memories could return at any moment, or never at all. He had learned to live with that uncertainty, yet something inside him knew there was more to his past than a simple mechanic's life. Time carried on inexorably. In different parts of the city, 3 identical girls grew up in completely different worlds. Abigail turned her pain into caring for others, building a makeshift family at the orphanage. Eleanor silently resisted having a forced identity, finding refuge in her secret art. And Grace, on the streets, created her own definition of home, proving that family isn't always about blood. Every night before sleep, each one looked at the same crescent moon, making the same silent wish they had been making for 6 years. In their dreams, 3 little girls in blue dresses and pink ribbons still ran freely through a sunny garden, their laughter echoing across time, waiting for the moment of reunion. The Chicago Public Library buzzed with students preparing for final exams. Now 15, Abigail led a study group for some of the orphanage girls, her fingers trailing along the spines of books as she searched for additional material on chemistry. On the 3rd floor of the same library, Eleanor hid among the art shelves. She had told the Millers she was at piano practice, but she used these stolen hours to draw. Her sketchbook was filled with faces, always the same face, multiplied by 3. Downstairs, Grace slipped into the building, seeking refuge from the autumn chill. Over the years, the library had become her sanctuary, a warm place to read and dream as long as she stayed discreet and tidy. It was the reflection in the window that first caught Abigail's attention. A face identical to hers, but with short hair, walking quickly through the corridor. Her heart stopped for a moment, the chemistry book slipping from her hands and thudding on the floor. The noise made Eleanor look up from her sketch on the floor above. Through the library's central opening, she saw a girl running on the ground floor, a girl with her own face. Her pencil rolled off the table, spiraling down to the lower level. Grace bent to pick up the fallen pencil. When she stood, her gaze met 2 girls identical to her, one running up the stairs, the other rushing down. Time seemed to freeze. Grace? Abigail's voice trembled. Abby! Eleanor could barely breathe. Ellie? Grace dropped the pencil again. They met at the landing between floors, their legs weak, hearts pounding. 6 years of separation dissolved in the instant their eyes locked. They were no longer the orphanage leader, the false Sarah, the street girl. They were once again the Lancaster triplets. The first hug was awkward, 3 bodies trying to occupy the same space, silent tears soaking shoulders and hair. A librarian walked by, casting a warning look that quickly softened when she realized the intensity of the moment. "Let's go to the back garden," Abigail whispered. "Ever practical. We can talk there." In the small garden, sheltered by tall bushes, the 3 sat on a stone bench, their hands remaining intertwined, as if fearing that letting go would prove it had all been just a dream. "Your hair," Eleanor touched Grace's short locks. "It's more practical for street life," Grace shrugged, her eyes gleaming. "Look at you, Ellie. So elegant. It's all a facade." Eleanor looked down. "The Millers? They try to turn me into someone else." Abigail squeezed her sister's hand. "Tell us everything." Stories flowed like a dam finally broken. Eleanor spoke of the years living as Sarah, her secret drawings, the forced piano lessons. Grace described life on the streets, the friends who became family, the nights in the shipping container. Abigail shared her experiences at the orphanage, how she learned to lead and care for others. "Do you think—" Grace hesitated. "Do you think Dad really died in that accident?" A heavy silence fell over them. Abigail pulled a yellowed newspaper clipping from her pocket, the announcement that the search for Flight 2471 had been called off. "I've kept this with me for years," she explained, "so I'd never forget." Liz must be happy now. Eleanor's voice had a bitter edge, alone in that huge manor. "Doesn't matter." Grace stood up, determined. "We've found each other now, and I'm not losing you again." "But how?" Eleanor asked. "I'm still a minor, legally under the Millers' custody." Abigail's mind, ever strategic, switched into gear. She pulled out a notebook. "We need a plan. Grace can't stay on the streets. Eleanor needs to get out from under the Millers. And well, the orphanage isn't so bad, but it's not our family." "What if," Grace began, eyes shining with an idea, "we build our own life together?" They looked at each other, years of solitary dreams converging into one moment of hope. "I'll get a job after school," Abigail decided. "I already have some savings from the Young Leaders program." "I can sell my drawings," Eleanor added. "I've received some offers, but the Millers never allowed it." "And I know every corner of this city," Grace grinned. "I know where to find the best opportunities. the cheapest places to live. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, reminiscent of the ribbons they once wore. The three sisters remained huddled together, making plans for a future that, for the first time in 6 years, seemed possible. "Promise you won't disappear?" Eleanor asked, her voice small. "Never again," Abigail and Grace responded in unison. They agreed to meet there every day after school. Abigail would bring entrepreneurship books from the library, Eleanor would start saving money from her piano lessons, and Grace would use her street contacts to find opportunities. When they finally parted, night had already fallen, but this time the separation felt different. Not an ending, but a beginning. 3 hearts beat in sync once more, bound by a bond stronger than time or distance. Back at the orphanage, Abigail wrote in her diary, "I found my guiding stars again." In her pink bedroom, Eleanor sketched 3 smiling girls, but this time it wasn't a memory. It was a plan for the future. In the shipping container, Grace looked at the stars and for the first time in years didn't feel alone. Destiny, which once tore them apart so cruelly, was now bringing them back together, and this time they wouldn't let anything stand in their way. The small cafe was empty at that early hour. Abigail studied spreadsheets spread across the table while Eleanor sketched designs on her tablet. Grace, in her new waitress uniform, served coffee to her sisters. "I convinced Mr. Peterson to sell us this space," Abigail announced, circling red numbers. "He liked the idea of a cafe gallery and agreed to let us pay in installments. And I already have 5 local artists interested in showing their work." Eleanor smiled, turning her tablet to display the layout she had created. "We can use the side walls for artwork and keep the center for tables." Grace set another cup of coffee on the table. "My contacts on the street can help with the renovation. Miguel is an electrician, you know, and Carlos is a carpenter." 3 sisters. Cafe and art was born from a confluence of talents: Abigail's administrative skills, Eleanor's artistic eye, and Grace's street smarts. The small spot on Augusta Street, once a rundown eatery, began its transformation. The first weeks tested their endurance. Abigail slept only 4 hours a night, balancing her time between the orphanage and the cafe. Eleanor faced constant questioning from the Millers about her extracurricular activities. Grace coordinated an unlikely team of workers, many of them homeless people looking for a second chance. "We can't pay much at the start," Abigail told the group gathered for the renovation. "Fair wages and a hot meal each day are more than most would offer," Miguel replied, organizing his tools. "Besides, Grace always looked out for us. It's time we give back." The cafe opened its doors on a sunny Saturday morning. The first exhibition showcased works by street artists, including sketches signed by Eleanor. The tables, restored by Carlos, shone under lighting installed by Miguel. The aroma of fresh coffee and newly baked bread drew curious onlookers. "This is more than a cafe," Abigail explained to a local newspaper reporter. "It's a space where art and community come together." The article, published the next day, highlighted the establishment's unique story. 3 young entrepreneurs transform abandoned space into cultural hub. Success came gradually, then suddenly. An influential food critic discovered the cafe and raved about the croissants that rival those in Paris. A renowned gallery owner saw the exhibited artworks and offered representation to 3 of the artists, including Eleanor. The staff's rehab stories caught the attention of a major social support foundation. 6 months after opening, the sisters inaugurated their second location. Within a year, they had 5 branches across the city. 3 Sisters became known not just for its food and art, but for its social impact. "We need a central office," decided Abigail, now 17 but with the confidence of a seasoned CEO. "We can't run everything from a cafe table anymore." The new office occupied the 3rd floor of a commercial building. In the conference room, a painting commanded attention: 3 little girls in blue dresses with pink ribbons, painted by Eleanor. "The Millers finally realized I'm not Sarah," Eleanor shared during a meeting. She now lived in a small apartment above one of the cafe locations. I think my success as an artist made them see I have my own identity. Grace, who managed the company's professional rehab program, no longer lived in the container. We turned it into a shelter, she explained. No one seeking help should have to sleep on the streets. Their business empire grew, but a shared restlessness haunted them. One night, after closing the flagship cafe, they gathered at their usual table. I found this today. Abigail placed a folder on the table. It's the original passenger records from Flight 2471. Eleanor and Grace leaned in. Years of business success had never lessened the pain of losing their father. There's something odd, Grace pointed at a list. Dad's name is on the passenger roster, but there's no check-in record. And look at this. Eleanor highlighted another document. The airline was sold to an investment group right after the accident. All the files were archived. Abigail opened her laptop. Now we have resources. We can hire the best private investigators. And connections, Grace added. My street network hears things rich, powerful people prefer to hide. We need to know the truth. Eleanor closed her sketchbook, where a new drawing showed William's face as she remembered it. Not just for Dad, but for ourselves. On the office wall, the portrait of the three sisters seemed to watch them with renewed hope. The empire they built wasn't just a business. It was a foundation to discover the truth about their past. Abigail opened a new spreadsheet, this time not to calculate profits, but to organize clues. Eleanor began sketching a timeline of events. Grace listed contacts who might help with the investigation. We'll find answers, Abigail promised, hugging her sisters. And this time, Grace added, nobody can tear us apart. We're stronger together, Eleanor smiled, looking at the empire they had built from scratch. On the table between them, the folder on Flight 2471 waited, guarding secrets that would soon begin to unravel. The empty cafe bore witness once more to the determination of three sisters who, against all odds, turned their pain into strength and their dreams into reality. Detective Robert Mendez's office smelled of stale coffee and dusty paperwork. The three sisters sat before his cluttered desk as he leafed through the dossier they had prepared. "Interesting," he murmured, adjusting his thick-rimmed glasses. "Very interesting. Most clients only have bits of info. You brought me a fully pre-investigation case." Abigail straightened her posture in the chair. "We learned to be thorough in business." "And we have resources," Grace added, placing a thick envelope on the table. "Financial and other kinds of information." Eleanor remained quiet, her fingers unconsciously tracing her father's figure in her sketchbook. "All right," Mendez leaned back. "I can start tomorrow. But a warning, old cases like this rarely have a happy ending. Any truth is better than living with uncertainty," Abigail replied. The following weeks were pure agony of waiting. The sisters threw themselves into work, expanding their chain of cafes, but their thoughts always drifted to what Mendez might uncover. The call came on a rainy Tuesday. "Miss Lancaster," Mendez's voice sounded different, more energized. "We need to meet. Immediately." In the dusty office, Mendez spread dozens of photographs across his desk. "I started by tracing the passenger list for Flight 2471. Something didn't match. William Lancaster's name was there, but there's no record he actually boarded." "We noticed that," Abigail interjected. "Yes, but you didn't have access to this." He pulled out a yellowed document. "It's a hospital record from Santa Rosa, dated 3 days after the supposed accident. A man was found unconscious on the beach. No ID." Eleanor picked up one of the photos with trembling hands. It showed a man in a hospital bed, his face battered almost beyond recognition. But still, "It's him," she whispered. "Dad?" The man had no memory, Mendez continued. He was registered as John Doe. After recovering, he went by Mike Smith. And here's the most interesting part. He slid another photo across the desk, taken last week. The image showed a middle-aged man working in a mechanic shop. His hair was graying at the temples, a thin scar marking his right temple. But the smile that had lit so many of their childhood mornings, was unmistakable. Where? Grace's voice barely rose above a whisper. Santa Rosa. He owns a small mechanics garage there, Honest Bob's Garage. The locals call him Mike, the guy who can fix anything. Lives alone, no close friends. Keeps a diary where he writes fragments of dreams that sometimes pop up. Abigail stood abruptly. We need to go there. Wait, Mendez raised a hand. There's more. I found this among his belongings. He showed a photo of 3 pink ribbons, carefully preserved in a box. He doesn't know why he keeps them, but he's never been able to throw them away. The drive to Santa Rosa was silent, each sister lost in her own thoughts, imagining how this reunion might unfold. The GPS led them down a narrow street where a faded sign read, Honest Bob's Garage, General Repairs. The sound of metal on metal guided them to an open garage where a man worked beneath a raised car. Hearing their footsteps, he slid out from under the vehicle. Can I help you? He asked, wiping his hands on a greasy rag. It felt surreal to see that familiar face, so changed. The scar, the graying hair, the new wrinkles around his eyes. But it was undeniably him. Mr. Smith? Abigail began, her professional tone barely disguising her trembling voice. We came from Chicago to talk about mechanical services. He frowned, confused. You came all that way just to... Actually, Eleanor interjected, gripping her sketchbook. We're here because... Her voice faltered. Grace stepped forward. Do you remember anything about your life before the accident? His expression changed instantly. How do you know about the accident? Because, Abigail took a deep breath, because you're not Mike Smith. Your name is William Lancaster. And we're your daughters. The silence that followed was deafening. William, Mike, looked from one face to another, his expression a mixture of confusion and something else. Fear, maybe. I have dreams sometimes, he said slowly, of 3 identical laughs, of pink ribbons in the wind. But the faces? I can never see the faces. Eleanor opened her sketchbook, showing him the portrait she had drawn of him as he used to be. This is you, our father. He took the drawing with trembling hands. I keep 3 pink ribbons in a box. Never knew why. They were ours, Grace explained gently. We wore them every day. I'm sorry, he shook his head, handing back the drawing. I see the resemblance. I see you believe what you're saying, but I don't remember. I can't remember. Abigail pulled out an old photo, the last one taken of them before that fateful day. Please, look carefully. He studied the picture for a long time, his eyes flicking between the paper and the faces in front of him, over and over. I feel something, he admitted, like a distant echo. But I can't reach the memories. That's okay, Abigail said, though her heart ached. We're not here to demand anything. We just wanted you to know that you're alive, that we're alive, and that we never stopped looking. As they turned to leave, his voice stopped them. Wait, would you like to have coffee? There's a diner nearby. Maybe you could tell me more about who I was, who you are. The 3 exchanged glances, tears silently rolling down their cheeks. It wasn't the miraculous reunion they had dreamed of, but it was a start, a door cracking open to possibilities that, until that morning, seemed impossible. We'd love to, they answered in unison, as they did in childhood. For one brief moment, something flickered in his eyes, a fleeting recognition, like a ray of sunlight piercing heavy clouds. The memories might still be lost, but some things were etched deeper than the mind. They were etched in the heart. The small house behind the mechanics shop smelled of fresh coffee and motor oil. William, they still struggled not to call him Mike, sat in his worn armchair, surrounded by 3 young women who were both strangers and strangely familiar. We found this in the old office at the manor, Abigail explained, opening a leather-bound photo album. Liz never got rid of your things. I guess she really believed you were dead. William ran his fingers over the album cover, his calloused hands leaving slight imprints on the yellowed pages. The first photo showed a younger version of him, holding 3 identical newborns in the hospital. "I can't remember this moment," he murmured, frustration coloring his voice. "But look at my hands in the picture. They're shaking." "You always said it was the scariest and happiest day of your life." Eleanor smiled softly, perched on the arm of the chair. 3 babies at once. Grace, who had been browsing the shelves, discovered a metal box. "What's this?" "My dream journal," William admitted with a slight blush. "The doctor suggested I jot down any fragment of memory from my sleep." With his permission, Grace opened the box. Inside were dozens of loose papers, some crumpled, others carefully smoothed out, all covered in William's slanted handwriting. "I dreamed of laughter echoing in a garden," she read aloud. 3 identical laughs. There was a red swing. "The swing you built for us?" Abigail exclaimed. It really was red under the oak tree. William closed his eyes, focusing. I can hear the creaking of the chain and voices yelling, "Higher, Daddy, higher!" The 3 sisters exchanged hopeful looks. It was the first time he had made such a clear connection to a specific memory. Eleanor opened her sketchbook. "I drew this last night," she said, showing a detailed sketch of the old garden with the red swing in the spotlight. William studied the drawing for a long time. The roses? There were white roses along the wall, weren't there? "Yes." Grace nearly jumped with excitement. "You planted them for our mom?" Mentioning their mother cast a shadow over William's eyes. "I'm sorry, I can't remember her." "It's okay," Abigail touched his arm gently. "One memory at a time." They spent the afternoon this way, paging through the photo album, sharing stories, watching for every tiny sign of recognition on his face. For every memory still buried, there was a seemingly insignificant detail suddenly recalled with crystal clarity. "That sound," William said suddenly, when Eleanor accidentally clinked her coffee cup against its saucer. "It feels familiar. Something about breakfast? And pancakes?" "The 3 of us!" the sisters exclaimed together. "You made pancakes every Sunday," Abigail explained, "and you always tapped your coffee spoon in the same rhythm, like a little tune." William closed his eyes, his hands moving in the air as if conducting an invisible orchestra. "Tap, tap, tap, pancakes for my princesses." "That's exactly it," Grace laughed, tears glistening. As the sun began to set, casting golden shadows across the modest living room, William picked up the box with the 3 pink ribbons he had kept all those years. "I always knew they were important," he said, running his fingers over the faded fabric. "But I could never figure out why. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night feeling like I've just tied a bow, but the dream slips away." Eleanor took out another drawing from her sketchbook, this time a detailed portrait of them at age 6, each wearing her trademark pink ribbon. "Abigail always wore hers perfectly straight," she explained. "Mine was always crooked, and Grace frequently lost hers during play." William examined the drawing, his eyes darting between each face. Was there a song, something about 3 princesses in the garden? Abigail began to hum a simple melody. Slowly, Eleanor and Grace joined in. 3 princesses in the garden, dancing without end. Pink bows in their hair beneath the loveliest sky. William closed his eyes, silent tears falling down his time-worn cheeks. "I used to sing that every night before bed." The moment was interrupted by Abigail's phone ringing. She glanced at the screen. "It's the cafe. We need to go back to Chicago." A flicker of panic crossed William's face. You'll come back, won't you?" "Of course," Grace held his hand. "Every weekend if you want." "And you can come see us too," Eleanor added. "Visit our cafes." "Cafe?" William frowned in concentration. There was something important about coffee, something about a special bean. "You used to import coffee beans?" Abigail exclaimed. "It was part of your business before the accident." Another piece of the puzzle, another small victory. As the 3 prepared to leave, William stopped them at the door. "There's something I've been feeling ever since you showed up," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's not exactly a memory, it's more like a deep knowing here." He touched his chest. "Every time you smile, every time you speak together, something inside me recognizes it, like my heart remembers what my mind forgot." The three embraced him at once, and for that moment, in the doorway of his modest home, they were a family again. Different, fractured, but slowly piecing themselves back together, memory by memory. "See you next weekend, Dad," Abigail said gently. It was the first time any of them had called him that since they found him. The sound of that simple word echoed between them like a promise, a link between a lost past and a future they were beginning to rebuild. On the drive back to Chicago, each sister carried a renewed hope. It was no longer just the three of them against the world. Now there were 4 hearts beating in harmony, even if one was still relearning the tune. William woke up drenched in a cold sweat. This dream had been different, more vivid, more painful. Echoing in his mind were children's screams and the sound of a door slamming violently. His hands trembled as he reached for the journal and pen on his bedside table. "Elizabeth," he wrote in shaky letters. "Her name is Liz, and she did something terrible." The sun had barely risen when he called Abigail. 2 hours later, the 3 sisters arrived at his house. They found him at the kitchen table, surrounded by scattered pages covered in frantic notes. "I've started remembering," he said without preamble. "They're fragments. But Liz, she was my wife, right? And she did something to you." Abigail sat down slowly, holding his trembling hand. "Yes, Liz is your second wife, and she kicked us out of the house when you went away." "We were so small," Eleanor continued softly. "Only 6 years old." William closed his eyes tightly. "I see flashes. A broken vase." "She was screaming." "That was the pretext she used," Grace explained. "But the vase fell on its own when the window was open." "Tell me," William asked, opening his eyes. "Tell me everything that happened afterward. I need to know." The sisters exchanged looks, hesitant. Abigail began. "I ended up at Hopewell Orphanage. I learned early on I had to be strong and organized. I took care of the younger kids, studied a lot. It was the only way not to lose myself in grief." William listened, silent tears rolling down his face. Eleanor continued. "The Millers adopted me. They tried to turn me into Sarah, the daughter they lost. I spent years living like a ghost, hiding who I really was. And Grace took a deep breath. I ran, lived on the streets, learned to survive, found kindness in the most unlikely places." William stood up suddenly, staggering to the sink. His shoulders shook with stifled sobs. "How could she?" he said, his voice thick with rage and sorrow. "How could I let this happen?" "It wasn't your fault," Abigail approached him. "You didn't know." And then came the accident. The accident? William turned, his eyes suddenly focused. There was something off about that flight. Something Liz knew. Something. The 3 sisters leaned in, alert. "I'm starting to remember," he went on. "Before the trip, I found some strange documents in my office. Suspicious bank transfers. Liz was embezzling company funds." "That's why you left so suddenly for Japan?" Abigail asked. "Yes? No? Wait." William pressed his temples. "The trip to Japan was a cover. I was headed to meet an investigator in Santa Rosa, but I never made it." "And Liz," Grace pressed, "she knew. She must have found out." William sat down again. That would explain everything. So the accident was no accident. "And then she got rid of us," Abigail concluded. A heavy silence filled the kitchen, the morning sunlight now pouring through the windows, illuminating 4 pensive faces. "We still have your will," Eleanor said softly, "the one you drafted before your trip." "Will?" William frowned. "We found it in your old lawyer's files," Abigail explained. "You left everything to the 3 of us. Liz has no legal rights to the manor or the company." Something flickered in William's eyes, a look of recognition and resolve. "Now I remember," he said more firmly. "I suspected. So I protected your inheritance." "What now?" Grace asked. "What do we do with all this information?" William looked out the window, gazing at the mechanic's shop that had been his entire world for so many years. "You've built something incredible," he said, turning back to his daughters. "Your cafes, your social work. You turned pain into something beautiful. But it's time to take back what's rightfully ours." Abigail opened her tablet, bringing up a spreadsheet. "I have a plan," she said, "but we need to do this properly." "Liz must face the impact of what she did," Eleanor added. "Not for revenge, but for justice." "And we need to make sure she never forgets," Grace said, a small smile curling her lips. William looked at each of his daughters, awed by the strong women they had become. "The trucks," he said suddenly. "You have those large trucks you use to stock the cafes, right?" The three nodded, beginning to catch on. "Then we'll use them." William smiled, a glint of the old businessman in his eyes. "We'll show up at the manor with a fleet of trucks, a triumphant return, like a symbol." Eleanor pulled out her sketchbook, already visualizing the scene. "The same trucks we used to build our empire will now help us reclaim our past," Ava finished. Abigail typed rapidly on her tablet. "We can organize everything in 2 weeks. Time to finalize the legal side and prepare logistics." "And me?" William asked, a shadow of doubt crossing his face. "My memories are still fragmented." "You're our father," Abigail held his hand. "Even if you can't remember everything, your heart remembers." Eleanor tapped his chest. "That's what matters." "And together," Grace concluded, "we're stronger than any lost memory." William hugged his daughters, and at that moment, another memory fragment returned. The scent of their hair, the weight of 3 small bodies in his arms, the sense of completeness only a father knows. "Then it's settled," he said, his voice resolute. "In 2 weeks, we go home." The sisters smiled, 3 identical smiles on 3 different faces. On the horizon, storm clouds gathered, a storm they would face together as a family. "Liz won't know what hit her," Grace chuckled softly. "It's not about revenge," Abigail reminded them. "It's about justice." "And healing," Eleanor added. William watched his daughters plan, their hearts beating in unison again. Blackwood Manor awaited them, and with it, the final reckoning with a past that had torn them apart for so long. The aroma of freshly roasted coffee filled the 3 sisters' central office conference room. On the mahogany table, floor plans of Blackwood Manor mingled with legal documents and detailed schedules. William ran his fingers over the blueprint of the house, each touch sparking new memories. "The study," he murmured, pointing to a room on the 2nd floor. It had a safe behind the Van Gogh painting. The combination. He closed his eyes, concentrating. "It was your birth date." Abigail made a quick note on her tablet. For the past 2 weeks, she had meticulously documented each memory William regained, aware any detail might be useful on their return. "And here," he continued, moving his finger to another section of the blueprint, "there's a hidden door in the library. I used to keep important documents there, including the original will." Dr. Martinez, the family lawyer, chimed in. He was present for the meeting. "The copy we have is valid, but the original would carry even more weight." On the other side of the room, Eleanor worked on her tablet, creating a 3D rendering of the manor based on William's memories and detailed descriptions. "The garden has changed," she noted, comparing recent photos with her recollections. Liz removed the old oak tree with the swing. "But she couldn't pull out the roots," Grace observed, looking at the images. "See? You can still see the outline where it once stood." Meanwhile, miles away, Elizabeth Lancaster wandered the manor's silent halls, her wine glass leaving small stains on the Persian rugs. The years had not been kind to her. Her face, though still striking, carried the marks of a guilty conscience drowned in alcohol. She paused in front of the Venetian mirror in the foyer, adjusting her pearl necklace. "Mrs. Lancaster," the housekeeper called. The gardener wants to know if he should remove the shoots growing where the oak used to be. Pull everything out, Elizabeth ordered, her speech slurred. I don't want anything from the past in this garden. Back at the sisters' office, the logistics team presented their plan. We'll have 5 trucks, Miguel, now Three Sisters operations manager, explained. We've organized a symbolic load for each one. Abigail opened a list on her tablet. First truck, vintage furniture we bought at auctions, similar to the Manor's original pieces. Second, artworks, including Eleanor's paintings based on our memories. Third, legal documents and evidence. Fourth, personal items we've recovered over the years. And the fifth? The fifth is my surprise, William interrupted, wearing a cryptic smile. Over the previous week, he had disappeared for a few hours each day, returning with a mysterious glint in his eyes. At the Manor, Elizabeth entered what used to be the triplets' bedroom, something she did only when deeply drunk. The room remained untouched, like a mausoleum for her guilt. 3 empty beds, 3 empty dresses, 3 lives she destroyed. Madam, the housekeeper, hesitated at the door. Another letter from the bank arrived. Elizabeth dismissed the envelope with an irritated gesture. She didn't know it contained notice of reactivated bank accounts in William Lancaster's name. At Dr. Martinez's office, stacks of paperwork piled up. We've recovered control of 60% of the original companies, he reported. Liz sold the rest over the years, but we have proof those sales were illegal. And the Manor? William asked, tension in his voice. Legally, it was always yours. The will you made before the accident ensured the property passed to your daughters if you died. Since you're alive, the property reverts automatically to your name. That night, at William's house in Santa Rosa, the family gathered for a special dinner. It was the last evening before the big day. On the modest table, elaborate dishes prepared by the Three Sisters chefs mingled with the familiar smell of pancakes. I remembered the recipe. William smiled, flipping another golden pancake. It was your Sunday breakfast. With chocolate chips, the Three Sisters said in unison. And cinnamon, William added, another memory clicking into place. Eleanor opened her sketchbook, revealing a new piece. 4 silhouettes before a mansion, the rising sun in the background. That's what tomorrow will look like, she said softly. A new dawn. Are you sure about the trucks? William asked. Wouldn't it be simpler just to show up with the police and the lawyers? Abigail set her fork down. The trucks represent our journey. We left that house with nothing and built our lives from scratch. Now we're going back, not as victims, but as victors. Each truck tells part of our story. It's our way of showing we turned pain into power, Grace agreed. At the Manor, Elizabeth tossed restlessly in her king-size bed, her nightmares haunted by 3 little girls in blue dresses and pink ribbons chasing her through endless corridors. Back in William's home, final preparations were made. In 5 garages across the city, 5 trucks stood ready, each packed with carefully organized cargo. In the first truck, Abigail reviewed, "We have the furniture, symbolizing our rightful inheritance." In the second, Eleanor added, "The art that kept our memories alive." In the third, Grace went on, "The evidence Liz can't deny." In the fourth, William concluded, "The fragments we salvaged from your childhood." And the fifth? The 3 looked curiously at their father. William smiled, tears welling in his eyes. In the 5th is my gift to you, something I've been working on as my memories returned. The night wore on, but no one could sleep. Abigail obsessively rechecked schedules. Eleanor put the finishing touches on her drawings. Grace contacted her street network for real-time updates. William sat in his old armchair, his dream journal open on his lap. On the last pages, his notes were no longer about random fragments, but increasingly clear, complete memories. Tomorrow, he wrote, we go home. Not as we were, but as we've become. My daughters are no longer the little princesses who needed my protection. They're queens who built their own kingdom. And I'm not just the father who lost them, but the father who has the privilege of witnessing the extraordinary strength they found in themselves. The full moon illuminated the sleeping city. At the manor, Elizabeth tossed in guilty dreams. In 5 different city locations, 5 trucks awaited sunrise, each carrying more than just objects, carrying pieces of a story that would finally come full circle. In a few hours, the sun would rise on a new chapter. The Lancaster family was not just going to reclaim a house, they were going to rewrite their story, turning tragedy into triumph, proving that some bonds are too strong to be broken by time or evil. Somewhere, 3 faded pink ribbons lay waiting for the moment to come home, just like the girls who once wore them with such pride. Dawn had barely broken when the first engines rumbled to life. 5 trucks lined up on a quiet street in Santa Rosa, waiting for the signal. In the first truck, William adjusted the rearview mirror, his hands trembling slightly on the wheel. The mechanic's coveralls had been replaced by a well-tailored suit, a gift from his daughters. "Are you ready, Dad?" Abigail asked from the adjacent truck, her voice steady over the radio. William glanced at the photo of the 3 little girls in blue dresses taped to the dashboard. "Ready?" The convoy moved out. Eleanor drove the 3rd truck, her sketches strewn on the passenger seat, drawings of the moment about to unfold. Grace, in the 4th truck, stayed in touch with her informants. Liz is still at the manor. She just dismissed the housekeeper for the day. The 5th truck, driven by Miguel, followed behind, its mysterious cargo still known only to William. At Blackwood Manor, Elizabeth studied her reflection in a vanity mirror, applying another layer of makeup to hide the deep circles under her eyes. The empty wine bottle from the previous night still sat on her bedside table. A distant rumble of engines caught her attention. "Mrs. Lancaster," the housekeeper's voice crackled nervously over the intercom. "There are some trucks coming onto the property." Elizabeth frowned, wobbling to the window. Her face went pale at the sight of the procession crossing the front gates, each truck displaying the Three Sisters Cafe and art logo. The trucks formed a perfect semicircle in front of the manor. One by one, their engines shut off. Elizabeth's heels clicked down the empty corridors as she made her way downstairs, gripping the banister for support. The doorbell rang. With trembling hands, Elizabeth opened the door. There stood 3 young women, no longer the frightened children she had banished, but confident, successful entrepreneurs. And behind them, William. His name slipped from her lips like a strangled sigh. William stepped forward, the scar on his temple visible, facing the woman he once called his wife. The moment their eyes met, the last puzzle piece of his memory locked into place. "The flight?" he said, anger simmering in his controlled voice. "You knew I discovered the embezzlement. You planned everything." Elizabeth staggered back, her spine hitting the doorframe. "No. You're dead? The plane?" "I never boarded that plane, Liz," William pressed on. "I was on my way to meet the investigator in Santa Rosa when the accident happened. Very convenient, wasn't it?" Abigail stepped forward, tablet in hand. "We have all the evidence. Your financial scams, the suspicious transfers, the documents you tried to hide. And we have something else," Eleanor added, softly but firmly. "The original will." Elizabeth let out a hysterical laugh. "Will? What will?" "Everything was destroyed in the accident." "Not everything," Grace smiled, pointing to the 3rd truck. "It's amazing what people keep for years, waiting for the right moment to reveal." Elizabeth's face went from flushed to ashen, her eyes darting between the furious faces before her and the imposing trucks out front. "What? What do you want?" she finally croaked, her voice small. "Our house back," the triplets said in unison. "My life back," William added. "And answers," Abigail finished. "All of them?" Elizabeth staggered backward into the foyer. The triplets and William followed, leaving the door ajar. Outside, the 5 trucks waited like silent sentinels, their contents still a mystery that made Elizabeth squirm in her chair. "You can't prove anything," Elizabeth tried, her voice shaking. "They're just suspicions." "I might not remember everything," William cut in, "but I remember enough. The night before the trip, when I found your files. Your reaction when I confronted you. The phone call you made, thinking I was asleep." Elizabeth turned even paler. You heard?" "Now I do." Quite clearly, William advanced. "You arranged everything. The fake flight boarding, the accident in Santa Rosa. You just never counted on me surviving." And then Abigail's voice was icy. "You took advantage of it to get rid of us. 3 little girls." "Thrown out like garbage," Eleanor added, tears shining. "But we survived," Grace concluded. "And we got stronger." Outside, the sun climbed higher, casting the truck's long shadows across the manor grounds. The oak tree might have been removed, but its roots remained deep and unshakable, like the bond that united the Lancaster family. Elizabeth stumbled to a chair, collapsing heavily into it. I had no choice," she whispered. "The money, the embezzlement, everything would have been discovered." "There's always a choice, Liz," William said firmly. "You chose betrayal. You chose cruelty." And now Abigail stepped forward. "It's our turn to choose." One by one, the truck drivers killed their engines, leaving a thick silence over the property. Whatever lay inside them remained a mystery, heightening Elizabeth's anxiety as she slumped in her chair. William looked at his daughters with pride and endless love in his eyes. Then he turned to Elizabeth, his expression hardening. "It's time," he said, pulling a small remote from his pocket. "Time to reveal what we brought in those trucks." Elizabeth cowered in the chair, her eyes glued to the closed truck doors. Outside, whatever was coming, she knew her life of lies and luxury was over. The sun reached its zenith, illuminating every corner of Blackwood Manor. The moment of truth had arrived, along with the reckoning 9 years in the making. Elizabeth rose from the chair, her posture changing abruptly, fear giving way to an arrogant mask the triplets knew all too well. "You think you can just show up," she sneered, pouring herself more wine, "with your trucks and your accusations? I built this life. I kept this empire running while you were off playing with coffee and art." "You built it with stolen money," Abigail stated coldly, her tablet displaying spreadsheets of bank transfers. "Every cent is documented." William paced the office, his fingertips brushing familiar objects. A favorite fountain pen, a crystal paperweight, an English desk clock. Each touch awakened more memories. "The safe," he muttered suddenly, turning toward a painting on the wall. "That's not the same painting." Elizabeth froze, the wine glass halfway to her lips. "What are you talking about?" "The Van Gogh." William moved closer. "You sold it and replaced it with a replica. But it doesn't matter. The important thing wasn't in the safe." A flashback hit William hard, a memory so vivid that he had to steady himself against the table. It was night. He was in this very office 9 years ago, documents proving Liz's embezzlement scattered over the desk. The phone was still warm from the call he'd overheard, her planning something with someone, mentioning accidents happen. Mr. Lancaster, his trusted lawyer, had asked, "Are you sure you want to do this now?" "Absolutely," William replied, signing the document with his favorite fountain pen. "I leave everything to my daughters. Liz can't touch any of it." "And the copy?" "Keep one in your office." "The original?" William headed toward the library. The flashback dissolved, leaving behind a crucial detail. William crossed the office with determined steps, his daughters and Elizabeth trailing him. In the library, he paused in front of a specific bookshelf. "Ellie," he called, "you drew the manor's floor plan. The secret door is here." Eleanor stepped forward, her skilled fingers finding the hidden mechanism Elizabeth had never known. With a soft click, a compartment opened, revealing a leather folder sealed with wax. "Impossible," Elizabeth whispered, all her arrogance drained. "Dr. Martinez," Abigail called, standing by the open door. The lawyer, who had been waiting discreetly, stepped into the library, a black portfolio in hand. "Mr. Lancaster, may I authenticate?" William handed him the sealed folder. The lawyer examined it meticulously, comparing it to the copy he already had. "The will is valid and irrevocable," he announced. signed 2 days before the alleged accident. It leaves all property and assets to the Mrs. Lancaster. Mrs. Elizabeth Lancaster has no legal claim to any of it. You can't do this. Elizabeth lunged forward, but Grace blocked her path. It's already done, Grace replied calmly. 9 years ago. William rubbed his temples as more memories flooded back. I suspected. I knew you'd do something. That's why I set up this protection for our daughters. Your daughters, Elizabeth spat. Always your precious triplets. You know why I kicked them out? Because they were a constant reminder I'd never really be part of this family. You had a choice, Eleanor said softly, tears in her eyes. You could have been our mother, not our jailer. You chose greed, Abigail added. And cruelty, Grace concluded. William drew closer to Elizabeth, a mixture of pity and contempt in his gaze. You tried to kill me. When that failed, you ruined the lives of 3 innocent children. And for what? To live here alone, drinking yourself away. Outside, the trucks cast ever longer shadows across the garden. Elizabeth stared at them, realization dawning on her tear-streaked face. The trucks, she whispered. You came to take everything back. Legally and rightfully, Abigail confirmed. Every piece of furniture, every painting, Eleanor said. Every memory, John finished. Dr. Martinez cleared his throat. Mrs. Lancaster, I suggest you start packing. The police are on their way to discuss charges of attempted murder and embezzlement. Elizabeth stumbled toward the window, looking out at the trucks. At last she understood. They weren't just moving vans. They were symbols of the triumphant return of those she had tried to destroy. The first truck, Abigail explained, her voice steady, contains restored vintage furniture to replace everything you sold illegally. The second, Eleanor continued, is full of real art to replace your replicas. The third, Grace smiled, carries every document, every piece of evidence of your crimes. The fourth, William added, holds every memory you tried to erase, photos, toys, records of the life we once had here. And the fifth? Elizabeth asked, almost against her will. William smiled, holding the remote. The fifth is special. It's my gift to my daughters. Want to see? Before Elizabeth could answer, he pressed the button. The doors of the fifth truck slowly opened, revealing its contents in the late afternoon sun. The will in his hands was no longer just a legal document. It was the key to unlocking the future, letting the past finally find redemption. The trucks weren't just moving vans, they were arcs, carrying back everything stolen, dignity, justice, and above all, the right to come home. The contents of the fifth truck left Elizabeth speechless. There, perfectly preserved, was the triplets' old bedroom, not a replica, but the original furniture William had secretly removed and stored days before his last trip. I knew, William said softly, his memories now crystal clear. That night, when I overheard your phone call, something told me to protect not just the money, but also the memories. Elizabeth collapsed into the nearest chair, her legs no longer supporting the weight of her lies. Her eyes, reddened by alcohol and regret, were fixed on the 3 small beds being carefully unloaded from the truck. How, she whispered, her voice barely audible. How did you hide all this? The same way I hid the will, William explained, sitting across from her. I had loyal friends who helped me preserve what mattered most. Abigail approached with her tablet, but instead of more incriminating evidence, she played an old video. The triplets at 6, dancing with Elizabeth at a garden party. There were good moments, Abigail admitted. Moments when we really believed you could be our mother. That's what hurt the most, Eleanor added, showing a portrait she had drawn of Elizabeth smiling years ago. Not just the cruelty of kicking us out, but the betrayal of someone we were starting to trust. Elizabeth touched the tablet screen with shaking fingers, watching her younger, happier self dancing with the girls. I had so many dreams when I married William. I wanted to be part of this family, part of this joy. What changed? Grace asked softly, perching on the chair's arm. Fear, Elizabeth admitted after a long silence. Fear of never being enough, of never truly belonging. I started embezzling money as insurance. If everything fell apart, I'd have something of my own. William shook his head. You could have talked to me, Liz, about your fears and insecurities. And then fear became greed, Elizabeth continued, tears now flowing freely. And greed became desperation. When you found out, I panicked. So you planned the accident, Abigail said. Yes, Elizabeth conceded, her voice breaking. And when I thought it worked, when I believed William was dead, something in me died too. Seeing you three was like seeing my guilt multiplied by 3. That's why you kicked us out, Eleanor realized. Not out of hate, but because you couldn't bear the weight of what you'd done. Elizabeth buried her face in her hands, sobs shaking her shoulders. How could I? How could I do this to 3 innocent children? Grace, to everyone's surprise, rested a hand on Elizabeth's shoulder. You know what I learned on the streets? Sometimes the cruelest people are the ones in the most pain. That doesn't excuse it, Abigail added firmly. But maybe it's a start toward understanding. William walked to the window, watching the old bedroom furniture being unloaded from the truck, each piece a tangible reminder of what was lost and what might be rebuilt. Liz, he called, his voice heavy with sadness and determination. Look at our daughters. See who they've become, not despite the pain you caused, but by transforming that pain into strength. The triplets gathered around their father, forming a semicircle in front of Elizabeth. We built something beautiful, Abigail said. Our cafes aren't just businesses, they're places of healing, of second chances. Of transformation, Eleanor finished. Elizabeth lifted her eyes, finding not the hatred she expected, but something more nuanced, a mix of pain, empathy, and possibility. I don't deserve forgiveness, she whispered. Maybe not, William agreed. But our daughters taught me something these past weeks. Forgiveness isn't something you earn. It's something freely given that heals not only the one who receives it, but especially the one who gives it. What happens now? Elizabeth asked, glancing at the approaching police officers. Abigail stepped forward, ever the pragmatist. Legally, you'll have to answer for your crimes. We can't change that. But in the meantime, Eleanor continued, you can begin your journey toward redemption. We have a rehabilitation program at our cafes, Grace explained, for people who need a second chance. And once all this is resolved, William concluded, when you've paid your debt to society and to yourself, maybe we can try again. Not as we used to be, but as who we've become. Elizabeth looked from one face to another. William, who had recovered his memories and learned how to forgive. Abigail with her strength and vision. Eleanor with her sensitivity and art. And Grace with her resilience and compassion. I accept, she finally said. I accept facing the consequences. I accept the path of redemption. And, her voice faltered, I accept the forgiveness I don't deserve, promising to earn it, day by day, from now on. At that moment, with the last rays of sunshine lighting up Blackwood Manor through the windows, the air itself seemed to change. This was not a happy ending. It was too complex for that. It was a new beginning, woven from threads of pain and hope, regret and forgiveness, the past and the future. Outside, the 5 trucks remained, no longer symbols of vengeance, but of transformation. The triplets' old bedroom would be rebuilt, not exactly as before, but as a memorial to what was lost and a testimony to what had been found. The police arrived discreetly, and Elizabeth received them with a newly discovered dignity. Before leaving, she glanced one last time at the family she had tried to destroy, now offering her a chance to rebuild. Thank you, she said simply. The triplets watched the police car drive away, each processing the whirlwind of emotions in her own way. Did we do the right thing? Eleanor asked. The right thing isn't always the easiest, Abigail replied, but it's what lets us grow. William wrapped his arms around his daughters, amazed at the wisdom they had gained through pain. The sun set on Blackwood Manor, no longer a monument to loss and betrayal, but a reminder that even the darkest stories can find light when there is courage to forgive and the strength to start again. Dawn tinted the sky in shades of pink as they opened the first of the trucks. The garden of Blackwood Manor, still damp with morning dew, bore witness to a new chapter unfolding. From the first truck emerged carefully restored vintage furniture, like ghosts of the past returning to life. William paused before an old leather armchair. "It was my father's favorite," he murmured, memories both old and new intertwining in his mind. "He used to tell me stories sitting right here." Abigail checked her notes. "Grandpa bought it in London, didn't he?" "In 1952. "Yes," William smiled, surprised by how precisely that memory returned. "How did you know?" "I found the original receipt among the papers we saved," she answered, showing him a neatly organized folder. The second truck revealed Eleanor's art collection, not just her own pieces, but works she had acquired over the years, each telling a part of her journey. "This one," she said, pointing to a particular painting, "was the first work I sold. With that money, I rented my first apartment away from the Millers." Elizabeth, watching from a distance, approached hesitantly. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "There's something about the eyes in that painting. Hope blended with pain." "Like us," Eleanor replied, surprising everyone by offering a small smile to her former stepmother. From the third truck, boxes upon boxes of documents were unloaded with meticulous care under Grace's supervision. "Each paper tells a story," she explained to the helpers, many of them people she had met on the streets. "Handle everything carefully. They're more than documents. They're puzzle pieces that brought us here." The fourth truck held the most precious treasures: family photo albums, old toys, clothes preserved in tissue paper. William picked up a small teddy bear. "It was yours, Ellie," he said. "The last gift I gave you before the accident." Elizabeth felt her knees give way at the sight of the teddy bear, the same one she had snatched from Eleanor's hands that terrible night. Silent tears streamed down her face. I need help," she admitted, her voice trembling. "Do you think, is there still time for me to change?" Abigail came forward, extending a card. "Dr. Santos, my therapist. She specializes in trauma and recovery." "You go to therapy?" Elizabeth asked, surprised. "All of us do," Grace answered. "You don't heal wounds by pretending they don't exist." In the weeks that followed, the manor was gradually transformed. Every room was cleaned, rearranged, and redefined. Between her therapy sessions, Elizabeth dedicated herself to restoring the garden. "White roses," she said one afternoon, planting fresh bulbs. "They were your mother's favorite, weren't they?" "Yes," William replied, joining her among the flower beds. "How did you know?" "I found her diary in the attic years ago. I never had the courage to throw it out. It's in the library." That evening, the triplets gathered with William to read their mother's diary. Words of love, hope, and dreams for her daughters filled the yellowed pages. "She wanted us to be happy," Abigail reflected, "to find our own way. And we did?" Eleanor smiled. "Just not how she might have imagined." "Maybe exactly how she imagined," Grace corrected her. "Strong, independent, together." A month after their return, the family convened in the library to discuss the future. Elizabeth, now more balanced after weeks of intensive therapy, asked to be included. "I have a proposal," she said. "I want to donate all the money I gained illegally to start a foundation to help children in vulnerable situations." The triplets exchanged surprised glances, but not entirely skeptical. "We already have some projects in mind," Abigail revealed, opening her laptop. "Through our cafes, we've identified several communities that need support. And my work with art therapy has shown amazing results for traumatized children," Eleanor added. "Not to mention my experience with the homeless," Grace chimed in. "I know exactly where and how we can make a difference." William observed the exchange with teary eyes. Flashbacks filled his mind. Abigail at 6, organizing her sister's toys, Eleanor scribbling her first drawings, Grace shielding her sisters during a storm. "The Lancaster Foundation," he finally said, for second chances and new beginnings. The project grew quickly. The first shelter opened 3 months later in a former Three Sisters Cafe location that was completely renovated. Elizabeth, to everyone's surprise, proved to be a dedicated administrator. "It's different when you're working for something bigger than yourself," she explained during a meeting. "Every child we help is a chance to make amends for what I did." One afternoon, as they organized donations at the shelter, Eleanor found Elizabeth silently weeping. "What's wrong?" "That little girl," Elizabeth said, pointing to a child playing in the courtyard. "She hugged me and said, 'Thank you, Auntie Liz.' Nobody ever hugged me like that, with such pure trust." Eleanor hesitated for a moment before doing something that surprised them both. She hugged Elizabeth. News of the Lancaster Foundation's work spread. Other business owners began contributing, inspired by the family's story of redemption. Abigail oversaw expansion with her trademark efficiency, while Grace developed professional training programs. 1 year after returning, Blackwood Manor was unrecognizable. Not physically, though that had changed, but in spirit. Laughter filled its halls, productive meetings were held in the office, and the garden once more became a place of joy. At sunset in the Lancaster Garden, a special celebration took place. It was the 10th anniversary of the foundation, and hundreds of people gathered to commemorate it. On the makeshift stage, Abigail presented the impressive numbers: 50 shelters across the country, thousands of lives touched, dozens of job training programs. Eleanor, now a renowned artist, had dedicated an entire wing of the manor to a gallery where works by children from the foundation's programs were showcased alongside professional artists. Grace oversaw a nationwide support network for homeless people, her work internationally recognized as a model for social rehabilitation. William, his hair now entirely white, but his eyes as bright as ever, watched his daughters with indescribable pride. Next to him, Elizabeth, sober for 9 years and fully devoted to social work, smiled quietly. In the heart of the garden, an old oak tree, replanted and now majestic, supported a new red swing. Here, a new generation of children played, their giggles echoing like music. On a special wall inside the manor, 3 faded pink ribbons were displayed in a glass case. Below them, a golden plaque read, "Sometimes we must lose ourselves to find ourselves. Sometimes we must break to rebuild. And sometimes the longest road home is precisely the road we needed to take." The Lancaster family story, which began in pain and betrayal, became a testament to the power of forgiveness, the strength of family, and the possibility of redemption. The 3 little girls, once thrown out into the streets, not only found their way back, they built a path so that others might find home too. In the end, they realized that home isn't just a place. It's the space we create in one another's hearts. And sometimes the most beautiful stories start with, "Once upon a time, there was a broken family," and don't end with a simple happily ever after, but rather with an ongoing promise to turn pain into purpose, hurt into mission, and tragedy into triumph. And those pink ribbons? They still danced in their memories, not as symbols of loss, but as reminders that certain bonds are too strong to be broken by time, distance, or even the deepest sorrow. Because in the end, love always finds a way back home.